I'm kind of slightly ambivalent about this, what seems to me to be a completely artificial choice between, as Bolaige said, two fingers of the same leprous hand. Whether we're talking about Goldie or whether we're talking about Lugard, as far as I'm concerned, a pestilence on both their houses. If anything, if I were to have a slight bias one way or the other, I would have to say that speaking as a soldier, and which Lugard was, he may have been advancing a pestilential cause, but he certainly applied his military mind to delivering. So he set out what aim, and this might sound like a staff college lecture, but excuse me, what aim am I trying to achieve? Okay? What resources do I need to achieve that? What are the constraints upon me? On the basis of that, what are the various courses of action available to me? And then you arrive at a plan. Now, I think it should also be borne in mind that Lugard was also insubordinate and disobedient when it suited him to do so. So he wasn't always following the official line, and there were times, particularly in the subduing of Sokoto, when he acted first and then presented the colonial office with a fait accompli. So because he knew that if he'd asked for permission, he might have been constrained, which leads to one of the kind of immortal lines in the staff officer's Bible. It is better to seek forgiveness than to seek permission. So that has to be said. Revolting individual, utterly revolting. You couldn't get a fact paper between the three of us in terms of our views on it, but he did manage to kind of, in a grudging way, wring some very reluctant and qualified admiration from me of the way he applied his military mind to achieve his pestilential purpose.
Well, I don't favor this father of nation sort of thing, because it offends my own understanding of history. This big man history that makes me reject founding fathers applies to this father of the nation sort of thing as well. I think history is more event-driven than people-driven. The people who act in these events that create big moments that have the cause and effect is what we study in history. There's a cause and it produces an effect. And they're born out of events and big moments. And sometimes it's little people who do these things. So I don't accept the singular father of the nation. And even if I was, it could never be Goldie. Because, don't forget, Goldie had this contraption, the Royal Niger Company, that had some treaties in a spattering part of southern Nigeria. And he created this All Rivers Protectorate, and then the Niger Coast Protectorate that became the Southern Protectorate. He had nothing to do with Kanu, he had nothing to do with Sokoto, he had nothing to do with Borno, he had nothing to do with, so that couldn't be Nigeria in any sense or shape. I dare say he had nothing to do with Lagos. Goldie had nothing to do with Lagos. Remember I told you there were three agencies. The Treasury that ran the companies. This charter was a creation of the Treasury. There was the Colonial Office that, by their very name, they ran the colonies. And there was the Foreign Office that created these expeditions that made certain incursions. When I say Nigeria was a product of the Foreign Office, it was because of the stated false policy of anti-slavery movement that created the pretext to come to Lagos, which really was about grabbing a port with a hinterland behind it. But it was the Foreign Office who decided to do it. And once they'd done it, they handed it over to the colony. So the point I'm making is that the activities of the Royal Niger Company cannot be ascribed to the creation of Nigeria. Indeed, the decision for Nigeria, all right, is probably the ideas of a guy called Reginald Antrobus, who was the Under-Secretary of State for the colonies, a civil servant in the Whitehall. But he was very involved. He was Mr. Nigeria in the Colonial Office. A guy called E.D. Morrell, who I'm sure those of you who've read the Victorian era would have come across E.D. Morrell. Lord Selborne. Lord Selborne was the chairman of the Niger Committee, whose recommendations decided that it was best to have one territory for the economic and financial convenience of running this large territory under one leadership. Lugard was, at that time, a captain in the West African Frontier Force. Goldie had had his charter revoked, so he wasn't even in a position to make those decisions. But again, I reject this whole father of a nation thing. It's not something I favor at all.